Nazila said on late April 30th, early May 1st, Obama staged a surprise visit to Afghanistan in the early morning hours, and he came in led by armed guards, and he didn't even announce his visit to the Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai, even though he was supposedly going to negotiate a withdrawal agreement. So at 4 o'clock a.m., President Obama held a photo op with Karzai and U.S. military personnel to give a carefully designed message that a page was being turned in the Afghanistan war. The implication is that war in Afghanistan is finally coming to an end under President Obama's leadership. But the reality is far different.
Yeah.
It is very important for people to understand the actual significance of President Obama's highly publicized visit. The trip had nothing to do with the outcome of the war itself and everything to do with the domestic political consumption. Essentially, it was designed to win votes for a war-weary public. So what was the actual agreement or of withdrawal about? And if you look at it, I think you would see the devil's in the details. The fine print of the so-called agreement between President Obama and President Hamid Karzai allows for troops and de facto military bases to remain in Afghanistan well beyond 2014, in fact, for decades to come. And this agreement was signed just weeks before the NATO summit to make it clear that the United States intends to remain the master of Afghanistan under the banner of a NATO force. And you can see this play out with France's new president, Francois Hollande, who's making more and more vague references to troop withdrawals going into the NATO summit. And if you look at the agreement, there's a sleight of hand going on as it calls the de facto bases Afghan military bases. This is a facade. The bases will keep U.S. troops and U.S. equipment in the country. The bases will be paid for by U.S. dollars. This is nothing more than a rebranding of the occupation. And it is important to note that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are committed to the long-term occupation of Afghanistan. President Obama's visit was nothing more than a political ploy designed to win support during this 2012 presidential electoral cycle. 69% of the people of the United States want the war in Afghanistan to be ended immediately. By giving the false impression the United States is actually ending the war in Afghanistan, President Obama and the Democrats are playing to this majority sentiment. Regardless of Obama's personal feelings, he is acting as the CEO of the capitalist system, and as such, the CEO must continue the imperialist goals of the capitalist class, or as the Occupy movement calls them, the 1%. The role of the president as the CEO of the 1% is self-evident in Obama's presidency, as he was elected in 2008 as an anti-war president. As you can see now, he's still not ending the war. As both Democratic and Republican parties will not end the war in Afghanistan, neither will their capitalist elections. For 10 long years, the people of Afghanistan have been living under a brutal U.S. NATO occupation. Is the brutality and destruction of the last decade really in response to the September 2001 attacks? Is it about killing terrorists, about democracy, or some other humanitarian reasons? Do the people of Afghanistan, a poor landlocked country 7,000 miles from the U.S., where the average life expectancy is 43 years, do they pose any military danger to the people of the United States? Leon Panetta, the current director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, tested before Congress that there were less than 100 al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan today. So why does the United States maintain 100,000 occupation troops there? One reason is that the U.S. government intends to incorporate Afghanistan into its sphere of influence in Central Asia. Secondly, the U.S. military is continuing to fight to avoid the perception of having been defeated by an armed insurgency in a poor third world country. An independent Afghanistan cannot be tolerated by the U.S. 1%. In 2001, the armies of the most powerful countries on the planet, led by the United States, invaded Afghanistan on a fraudulent pretext. They overthrew the central government, installed a puppet leader, and began building permanent military bases all over the country. The U.S. has mercilessly bombed and razed whole villages and killed tens of thousands of civilians. Afghanistan is the scene of the most gruesome brutalities committed against women, children, and all civilians by foreign militaries, private mercenaries, and CIA and U.S. military death squads. Torture is routinely used by all hostile foreign forces and the U.S.-run Afghan security services. Yet, despite its vastly superior killing machines, U.S. imperialism has not won the war. Afghan forces opposed to the recolonization of their country control most of Afghanistan. Attacks by over 40 resistance organizations often involve hundreds of fighters and have been successful in driving U.S. and NATO forces from their positions in several areas of their country. So even now, more than ever, the U.S. government has made its case for continuing the widely unpopular criminal war in Afghanistan based on the claim that progress is being made and Afghan military forces will take over the job. And this is what we see when Obama visited, because it would allow for the U.S. to withdraw, is what they're saying. President Obama recently reiterated during this in his surprise photo op to Afghanistan, as I said, where he gave the illusion the war was winding down and could soon be taken over by Afghan forces. But as I stated earlier, the current reality of the occupation of Afghanistan is far from the portrayal they're putting in the media right now. And to kind of emphasize that, I want to quote Army Command Sergeant Major John Troxell. He's one of the highest ranking and most experienced soldier in Afghanistan right now. Quote, "They trust each other, but whenever they meet one another, each soldier brings a personal security team. I always have someone locked and loaded, passively watching." He's referring to his fellow Afghan counterparts that are supposed to take the reins of struggle from the U.S. when they supposedly withdraw in 2024. His words reveals how he feels about his Afghan counterparts, and it sheds light on the claims that the United States trusts Afghan forces. If the occupation of Afghanistan is such a success, and the end of the war is right around the corner, as they're saying, why does Troxell need a personal security team every time he meets his Afghan counterpart? The U.S. government and its top military leadership, they've been caught in a lie yet again about their claims of Afghan support for U.S. goals and progress toward being able to turn over Afghanistan to reliable pro-imperialist forces. What is really happening is nothing like a trust relationship. In fact, what is happening is being called right now green on blue killings, and this means U.S.-funded Afghan soldiers are killing U.S. soldiers, becoming one of the biggest threats to the lives of U.S. soldiers, and right now it's an all-time high. When I quote Troxell again, he said, quote, "Often the Afghans are young and poorly educated. They have likely heard anti-Western propaganda all their lives. What we have to do is educate these young men." Let that really. So for the past 10 years, the United States has waged a brutal occupation that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Afghan people and plunged their country into a chaotic quagmire. A country where over 92% of young men have never heard of 9/11 or the World Trade Center. The war right now is at an all-time high in unpopularity among both U.S. and Afghan people, as well as service members. The Afghan people do not exactly hear anti-Western propaganda. They see it, they feel it every day in the form of missiles, Apache strikes, night raids, and the funerals of their family members. This begs the question, what must these young men be educated in? And it doesn't take a genius to realize that no one of any nationality wants their country occupied for any moment of time. year, an article featured a company commander who absurdly boasted that they can successfully maneuver 100 meters, about the size of a football field, from their combat outpost without being shot at. Now, before, they couldn't leave their outpost without being shot at. So 9 years to clear 100 meters. Sounds like real progress. As we see atrocity after atrocity erupt in Afghanistan, for example, the video of Marines urinating on the dead, the burning of Qurans, the Afghan kill team, the Staff Sergeant Bale's massacre that left over dozens of Afghans dead in the middle of the night, should it really be any surprise that people of Afghanistan are rejecting the U.S. NATO occupation of their country? Can anyone really blame them for doing so? In fact, the reason so many U.S. service members turn against the wars after fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq is because they realized if they were there, they would do the exact same thing. So I want to go back to what Obama was saying about the partnership between the Afghan-funded forces and the U.S. military to kind of show you what's going on and what this partnership really means. And it means that Afghans are not allowed to bring weapons in American offices. However, a U.S. soldier always has a loaded weapon when entering the Afghan side of their complex, and they're segregated. Likewise, on the Afghan Air Force wing of the base, U.S. airmen wear their body armor and carry rifles to their work. Their Afghan counterparts are prohibited from bringing their weapons into joint facilities. This, to me, brothers and sisters, does not sound like a partnership between U.S. and Afghan forces against the Taliban, as Washington and the Pentagon would have us believe, but rather a failing policy that is continuing to cause more suffering, death, and misery. Opposition to the U.S. NATO occupation is so widespread, so popular, that it even penetrates the highest levels of the Afghan government, police, and military in what you would think is the safest areas. Of course, as far as Troxell's friends, which is the White House, Congress, the office corps, the Pentagon, and the parasitic war profiteers are concerned, they will never be placed in harm's way. They're not concerned. They're in no rush to end an occupation that they know is doomed to fail. In fact, this war was failed the day it began. The leaders of the military are consciously sending young men and women to their deaths, knowing full well that the U.S. strategy is incapable of being successful. They are knowingly lying to our loved ones, our friends, family members, and to the people of the United States. They are forcing an occupation on a sovereign people who overwhelmingly want us out, killing thousands in the process. Just recently, an 84-page report was released to the public by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, and it destroys the castle of lies built by Washington regarding the success of the Afghan war and the promise that it will end. He states in there that there is absolutely no way this war is winnable or has even affected the Taliban. And to kind of give you that, I'm going to quote him right now. Even a cursory observation of key classified reports and metrics leads overwhelmingly to the conclusion that over the past 2 years, despite the surge of 30,000 American soldiers, the insurgent force has gained strength. President Obama's promise that the U.S. forces will leave Afghanistan is premised entirely on replacement by Afghan puppet forces, who are also hated among many Afghanistans. But even those intended puppets are not dancing, as Washington is assuring the public they will. The reason there is such a lack of desire by the Afghan police and military to engage the Taliban is because even many among the Afghan police and military overwhelmingly disagree with the U.S. occupation. The United States has failed so miserably in Afghanistan that what should be the most pro-occupying force in the country has rejected U.S. NATO-led debacle. They are only able to fill the ranks by a promise of a paycheck. Workers in the United States would lose nothing from a defeat of US imperialism in Afghanistan. The futures of the people of Afghanistan and the people of the world are tied together. The string of wars on Panama, Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, the proxy wars on Somalia, Yemen, and Palestine, and even the threats of war against Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, and others. This is part of a grand strategy of overthrowing every independent government of the globe. Washington's bloody invasion and occupation of Afghanistan is driven by capitalism's intrinsic drive for expansion in search of profits. And why this is specifically important for Afghanistan is because of its position in very close proximity to vital trade routes between the Middle East and Asia, between Central Asia and China, between Iran and Asia, between Russia and parts of Asia. And to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about geographically, I'm going to put a map up here, and I just kind of want you to look at it and have it in your view as I give you some important details of why it's strategically important. The vast majority of oil and natural gas in the world is in a large region comprised of the Middle East, Central Asia, and the entire Caspian region. Around 70% of the world's proven oil reserves are located in this wider region. US imperialism's fantasy would be to install puppet regimes and permanent bases in Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. In the minds of Pentagon generals, this would give the United States a virtually unassailable geostrategic position in Euro-Asia. It would place it on the doorsteps of China and Russia, between the energy region on one hand and Europe, China, Russia, and India on the other. And I'm also going to give another quote, because Richard Boucher, in 2007, he was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Affairs, and he really put it nicely. One of our goals is to stabilize Afghanistan so it can become a conduit and a hub between South and Central Asia, so that energy can flow to the south, and so that the countries of Central Asia are no longer bottled up between two enormous powers of China and Russia, but rather they have outlets in the south as well as to the north and the east and the west. Central Asia, located between Russia, China, and Afghanistan, is made up of the following countries: Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And it's really important to note that these countries were former members of the Soviet Union, and when they were independent of US imperialism. But now, because of US imperialism, they are dealing with that. According to the International Energy Statistics Administration, Kazakhstan has 30 billion barrels in oil reserves, the 12th highest in the world. Chevron owns the rights to Kazakhstan's oil until 2033. Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan have immense natural gas reserves. Turkmenistan ranks 4th in the world with 265 trillion cubic feet in natural gas reserves. Now, in order for the oil and natural gas to be exported from the landlocked regions of Central Asia, pipelines are needed. Currently, the main pipelines from Central Asia run through Russia until in 2009, China completed its first 2 Central Asian pipelines that import oil and gas directly from those regions into China. There are pipelines from Azerbaijan to Turkey, partially owned by Chevron and British Petroleum, engineered by Bechtel. And they transport oil and gas out of Azerbaijan, which has 7 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. There is a proposed pipeline between Turkmenistan, Iran, Pakistan, and India, and another one connecting Iran, Pakistan, and India that are being aggressively opposed by Washington, as it is the construction of more Central Asia pipelines to Russia. For decades, Washington's goal has been the construction of the TAPI or TAPI pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan with a branch to India. But the invasion of Afghanistan has not led to the construction of that pipeline. It would have to go through southern and eastern Afghanistan that is controlled by occupation forces. So just to give you an idea, let me see. So this is Afghanistan. These countries right here, those are the former Soviet Union countries, which is like considered Central Asia. This is the Caspian region, and this is Azerbaijan. The US has mostly control of this region, a little bit here, but they come in here. So what they want to do is go out through here to go that way or that way, but they can't, or they're having much trouble because of the resistance. Thank you for letting me show that to you all. And I want to now talk about Afghanistan's history, because we always hear how Afghanistan has to be taught the lessons of democracy by the US, especially now in the media. But contrary to the ruling class propaganda, Afghanistan has not always been led by reactionary social forces. Between 1978 and 1992, Afghanistan was ruled by a progressive government that made a serious effort to modernize Afghanistan and end its feudalism. There was a communist party, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, or PDPA, and it was formed in 1965, and in 1978 they were able to lead a successful revolutionary coup along with Afghan military forces that overthrew the government and established the People's Republic of Afghanistan and began the transition to socialism. This new government canceled the enormous debts of peasants and started training teachers and building schools and hospitals all over the country. Women could no longer be sold into marriage or executed for so-called infidelities. Literacy campaigns were undertaken in the many different languages in the country. And despite violent resistance from the rich landowners, 200,000 peasants in a country of 20 million received land from the government. From 1978 to 1981, public school enrollment went from 5,000 to 600,000. 19,000 teachers were trained. That's amazing. Immediately, the United States launched a counter-revolutionary offensive that lasted 14 years and became the largest CIA operation in history, costing an estimated $6 billion. And just as the US government, the 1%, had no concern for people's democracy then, they have no concern for it now. The 1% does not all of a sudden become a champion of human rights after years of massacre. The US capitalist class has only one view of democracy, and that is upholding of the super rich's right to continue a brutal, decade-long war of profit. The Obama administration is willing to stage a photo op to lie to the American people, to pretend that they have every intention of ending the occupation of Afghanistan. But we now know that because of Afghanistan's geographical importance, the US capitalist establishment would like to stay in Afghanistan permanently, and they will go to great lengths to keep it from once again achieving its independence. Their problem is that even against great odds, the people of Afghanistan will never stop fighting for independence. This is an irreconcilable conflict at the heart of the war. Only the complete withdrawal of all US and NATO forces can end the war in Afghanistan. Ending the wars and occupations of Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, Libya, and elsewhere are important key demands right now. The Answer Coalition, of which the PSL is a member, is joining with hundreds of other organizations and mobilizing from the Chicago area, the Midwest, and the country to come to Chicago for the mass march and rally to resist the war makers this Sunday for the NATO summit. Our very own comrade, Cristiano, will be there organizing in the streets to demand US NATO out of Afghanistan. The war on the people of Afghanistan is interconnected to the war on the working people in the United States. Obama knows this. He knows it so well that he would stage negotiation just to placate us. at the same time that he steals our tax dollars to use them to take money off of the death and misery of Afghan people. Tax dollars that could be used to end mass foreclosures and homelessness, to end massive joblessness, student debt, and incarceration. It is time that we, as the 99%, takes control of our resources to end the occupations abroad and provide for our needs. To do this, brothers and sisters, we need to organize. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is that organization that will develop those leaders to do this. I encourage everyone here, if you want to fight back, join us. Thank you.